Well, good morning, everyone. I see a lot of people in the back standing up. We have lots of seating in the front here. You're welcome to come join, hang out. So the purpose of this session is really to help everyone start to think interchain. Think about the connections between the blockchains. Think about the differences and the ways that we can take advantage of them. And part of the way that I want to start this off is by telling a little bit of a story about a young crypto Steven. This was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where I'd been building smart contracts for a while, and I started, hey, I want to actually go to production. I want to go to mainnet with these smart contracts. And so I looked around at all the chains that were around, and I decided, hey, I think I'm going to ship Polygon. I'm going to ship all of my smart contracts on Polygon. I'm going to actually ship some dapps. It's going to be really exciting and really fun. And so in order to make this transition as a developer from moving from testnets over to mainnet, you actually need currency. You actually have to buy the currency and the tokens to do those smart contract deployments. And I thought, this is going to be really easy. I'm just going to go to an exchange, buy some Matic, which is the token of Polygon, and then I'll be able to deploy my smart contracts. So I went to Coinbase. Maybe this was a dumb decision. Maybe you're all laughing at me. But it's a pretty well-known name. And I went to Coinbase, and I bought $10 of Matic, and it says Polygon. This is the current UI. It was the same UI then a couple years ago. And I thought, OK, I'm going to be buying the right token. I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to be able to deploy my smart contracts. I initiate the withdrawal from Coinbase. It ends up in my wallet on the wrong chain. If you've ever bought Matic on Coinbase, you'll later discover, not at the beginning, but after you get into a little bit, that you're not actually getting Matic on the Polygon chain. You're getting Matic on Ethereum, which is how the Polygon chain originated. Right? So I actually got the wrong token. And this was actually a big problem for me because when I asked other developer friends, like, oh, just bridge it over. It's very easy. And I'm like, OK. So I pulled up the bridge. OK, you need Ethereum gas in order to bridge Matic to the Matic chain. And so now I'm like 3 layers deep where I'm like, OK, now I have to buy an additional token, withdraw that additional token, pay the additional fees, execute transactions on Ethereum, which are very expensive. Right? This would eat up a lot of that $10 of Matic that I bought in order just to deploy a smart contract. And the reason I tell you this story is because, in some ways, the way that we make developers think about all these different chains is fundamentally flawed. We need to get to a world where we, as the creators of these systems, are thinking interchain and trying to design abstractions and make sure that this becomes a much easier process for everyone out there so that the next great innovator that comes along doesn't get stuck with the wrong token on the wrong chain. And this is actually a problem that's getting worse from some perspectives. There's this thing called the paradox of choice, where the more chains that come out, the more time that passes, our ecosystem gets more and more complex. Right? The complexity is increasing. The number of options and choices is increasing, which sounds like a really good thing. But when you keep expanding and expanding, what you're actually doing is you're making it more difficult for new entrants. And so as we look to the future of blockchain that I think a lot of us see, we have to continue thinking about what does this experience feel like for new people? And how do we make sure that as we're adding more choice, more capabilities, more features, we're not making it more and more difficult for new entrants, which is going to scare people away. And I'm really excited about the Interop Summit. And one of my favorite parts about the Interop Summit is actually the second word here, summit. I prefer summits to conferences because when I think of a conference, I think of a place that everyone's going to sit in the audience and you're going to absorb information. You're just going to sit there. Maybe you'll take notes on a phone or a laptop, and maybe you'll share that when you get back. But a summit is a place where people can actually come together. It's a place where people can come together and actually create together, co-create this future. And so that's what I'm really, really hopeful that we're all going to be able to take a chance to do today and tomorrow. So as Galen mentioned, my name is Stephen Fluin. I'm head of developer relations at Axelar. The way that I think about developer relations is that I have 2 parts to my mission. The first part is making you successful. So whatever success means to you, maybe that is you want to go win a hackathon. Maybe that is I want to go get funding for my startup. Maybe I want to take my dApp and go to mainnet. Whatever that is, I want to figure that out and make sure that we are giving you the tools, the education in order to achieve that. And the second part of that is really empathizing with you. I want to actually know what it's like sitting out there in the audience, being a developer, being a newcomer to the space, and make sure that we're using that empathy and that understanding of what it's like for them to make sure that we're building the right tools, that we're telling the stories in the right way. Everything about this industry is still in flux. We're still figuring everything out. And I think if we figure it out together, we're going to be doing a much better job. So today's talk, we're going to go through this in 3 sections. First, I want to talk about the future being interchain, and I want to give you several principles on which I believe that's going to be the case. Then, I want to talk about how we can all come together to build better dapps. And lastly, I'm going to kind of ask everyone here and figure out how we can build more meaningful abstractions to make this process easier for everyone. So let's kick things off. I believe that the future is interchain. And I've heard a couple of questions in conversations yesterday about interchain. Yes, that is a term that has come originally, I think, from the Cosmos ecosystem, but that is not how I'm using it. When I say interchain, I mean all of the connections between blockchains and how they make things meaningful for you as developers, whether that's EVM, Cosmos, Solana, any chain, right? Interchain is us thinking about how these things can come together rather than being separate. So principle number 1, the number of chains is increasing. Again, think back to the young little crypto Steven, and I thought something. I thought that, oh, we're going to get rid of all these chains. We're only going to need one blockchain eventually. One blockchain, they're going to have all the features, and it's going to solve all the problems for us. If you look at the data, if you look at the developer choices that everyone's making out there, I was completely wrong. The number of chains continues to increase. And I think one of the big reasons behind this is that our needs in blockchain are based around decentralization. And so those decentralization needs are driving decentralized innovation. Innovation is not coming from one company because everyone has different needs. And this is something I'm going to explore a little bit further as well. So there's this website, Chainlist. Has anybody used Chainlist before? Okay, a bunch of people. So it's just a list of chains, basically. It's in the name, it's pretty simple. There are 455 mainnet chains listed on Chainlist right now. So if you think back 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe it was safe to just say, I'm going to build on Ethereum. But that choice is not as safe today, right? You need to be thinking, you need to be considering what are the chains that are out there, what are the chains that are right for you. And I say that there's 455 chains on here, but that's actually wrong. That's only the EVM chains. That's only the Ethereum-based chains. And again, I'm even more wrong because that's only the, we're completely ignoring things like Solana, Cosmos, all the other chain stacks that are coming out. And beyond that, this is a list that's created by people, right? I'm sure it's open and people can contribute and things like that. But we are a decentralized ecosystem. Not all of the chains that exist are even on that list. And so with all this decentralization, with all these different tech stacks, there is no master list of all the blockchains out there. And so we have to continue thinking and continue exploring and pushing the boundaries of how we can find new connections. All right, principle number 2. The number of dapps is increasing. Hopefully this isn't surprising to anyone in the crowd here, but I want to tell a little bit of a story about Microsoft. So a long time ago, the Microsoft product managers were looking at Microsoft Word. And they said, wow, we got a lot of features. A lot of people are saying that Microsoft Word is becoming more and more and more complex. And so they did a bunch of surveys, they did a bunch of UX research, and they discovered that the average user uses 40 features of Microsoft Office. And they thought, OK, this is great. We'll cut the rest of the features, and we'll hit the majority of users. But that wasn't actually what they discovered. So while the average user only used 40 features, they all used different 40 features. And so anytime you start cutting out any feature from the platform, you start losing users. And so this is really, really a good analogy, I think, for the blockchains that are out there. There is no one blockchain that can have all of the features that every developer needs. There's trade-offs that we have to make between speed, scalability, cost, all those sorts of things. And so when we're building Interchain, we're thinking Interchain, you're not going to have one chain that solves all those needs. And so if we spend more time trying to understand the specific chains and the specific use cases that we're supporting, we're going to be much more successful. To build on this even further, the number of dapps is just increasing, right? Every user has different needs, privacy, cost, security. And not only do the users have different needs, but the developers have different needs, right? We talk about things like upgradable contracts. That is a need that is driven by developers who are not going to get things right on the first try, but fundamentally go against some of the principles of decentralization. And so how do you balance these things? So the more dapps that are out there, the more chains we're going to need, and the more we're going to need to think interchain. So principle number 3, decentralization is increasing. This is a chart from DeFi Llama talking about total value locked. And if you look at this chart over time, what you'll see is that centralization is yielding always, 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 and continuously to decentralization. I'm sure 5 years from now, this list is going to be very, very different. We're going to see a bunch of new chains on there. We're going to see a bunch of different players that are driving the ecosystem forward. So if you, as a creator or a dApp developer in the space, want to change the world, you can't just go to a single chain anymore. You have to be everywhere. You have to be interchain. All right. The second section I want to talk through a little bit here is about building better dApps. So I want to start with a little bit of a precedent, because we've had standards for a long time. We've had things on the internet that have made it very, very successful. And two that I'll call out in particular: HTTP, the hypertext transfer protocol that we use for basically every web page out there, and SMTP, the simple mail transfer protocol. These two technologies have underpinned, from my perspective, a lot of the growth of the internet and the fact that we're all in here. Does anyone here not have an email address? Like, I know we're on Telegram, I know we're on WhatsApp, but everyone here has an email address. And that was only possible because of standards like SMTP. Right? And we've actually been very lucky. We have built together collaboratively across all the countries of the world, all the ecosystems of the world, a unified internet, where because we have these standards, because we have these protocols, users can use whatever client you want, right? You can go get a Gmail address. You can go run your own mail server. You can run your own web server. You can use whatever. You can use Chrome, Opera, although there's decentralization questions there, but we can explore that later. And the idea that users can connect to whoever they want to, right? Other people, other applications. And this is the magic of the internet. This is what has allowed even blockchain to come to the forefront, is that we're all innovating together in the same sphere. And blockchain in many ways has this, right? Blockchains are decentralized. You can use any client, you can use any node, right? Like if you look at the Ethereum blockchain, there's intentionally multiple projects trying to build nodes for validators, right? Because that decentralization powers the network. It drives us to better innovation and better quality and better decentralization. And as a person that exists on a chain, I can connect to any dApp, right? I don't need permission. And this is magical, but there's a problem here if you contrast that with what we've got with the internet. Within blockchain, we have 455 plus internets where we can't actually communicate between all of these different blockchains. We have these standards, but we don't have standards between them. We don't have these interchain standards. And so it really ends up being up to the dApp developers to take this on, because dApp developers are the ones that have the power to unify. And I would even say that they have the responsibility to unify as we think about the number of chains continuing to increase and the needs, the various needs of all their users continuing to expand. When I think about a developer learning this space, it starts with two stages. It starts with this first concept of unlocking, where you'll hear about blockchain, you'll get excited, you'll discover your favorite L1, and you'll say, I'm going to learn that tech stack, I'm going to go learn Solidity so I can deploy on XYZ chain. And that's a magical moment. It's an important moment where you start getting used to this idea of thinking in a decentralized way. But then later comes scaling. And scaling involves a lot of different decisions that you have to make as a company, as an individual, as a team. What am I going to do about gas costs? What are the fundamental economics of my dApp? How am I going to pay for this? How am I going to make money as a company that I can continue to invest my time and energy to making this work? Who's going to help me with audits? How am I going to make sure that I'm secure so that I'm not another one of these stories that ends up on Wrecked that I actually have a guilty pleasure of reading all the time? How do I worry about performance, right? Is the block time on some given chain good enough for me? What about reliability? What's the uptime of this chain? All right, are transactions reliably processed? And all that comes down to generally a chain choice. But I would say that misses out on this third step, which is connecting. And I think even worse than missing out on that third step of connecting across different blockchains and across different ecosystems is the fact that it's a separate step at all. If I get my way, and if we're all successful here today in thinking interchain, I want to see us unify this idea of connecting different blockchains. And the idea of being interchain should actually be a fundamental architecture choice that you make very, very early on, because that is how you're going to get to users. This is how you're going to get to success. Being interchain is fundamental to the long-term success of your dApps, really not an afterthought. And so everyone here, this is why I want you thinking interchain. The last section here is about meaningful abstractions. Because when I think about Axelar, and part of the reason that I ended up at Axelar is this vision, this kind of long-term pie-in-the-sky idea of a world where you as a user, you as a developer, don't have to worry as much about which chain. Right? I want that question to kind of disappear through meaningful abstractions. Right? There's some abstractions out there right now. One of my favorites is IBC, which I'll just poke a little bit of fun at IBC, which is if you pull up the documentation of IBC, which is this Cosmos standard for inter-blockchain communication, it's like a 85-minute read, the first page of 4 sets of documentation on how to do this IBC communication. which is we don't have the right abstractions yet. And so this is something we need to continue fixing so that we can get to that long-term vision of not caring which chain things are on. And I want to give a few examples of some of these meaningful abstractions that we could have and that we kind of need at some point. And the first one is really the availability of tokens across chains. Right? DEXs are very, very popular. They kind of underpin DeFi. They underpin a lot of the transactions that are going on in these blockchains. But a lot of them are fundamentally limited. They're limited to the specific assets on the specific chain. And so when you're talking about launching a new DEX on one of these 455 blockchains, if you launch a DEX with no liquidity, you're not going to be successful. And if we had better more meaningful abstractions around how you can access all of those tokens, those dapps, those DEXs could actually become successful with their new ideas, with their new trade-offs. The second example of this abstraction that I think we need to get to is the interactivity of dapps. There's some really, really useful dapps out there. One that comes to mind a lot for me, and I talk to a lot of people about, is OpenSea. Right? I have NFTs. I want to sell and market those NFTs using a centralized or a semi-centralized marketplace like OpenSea, where developers know, users know to go there to look for things. They know to go there to sell things, buy things. Right? That marketplace has value by everybody being in the same spot. But OpenSea is not actually available on all the chains that they might want. Right? But if we had more meaningful abstractions on how things could move across chains, OpenSea could then be a front end to all of the blockchains and all of the NFTs in the world. And that would be better for users. And the last one is that if you look back at HTTP and SMTP, both of those standards are built on a common set of identifiers, right? We call this the DNS system. And DNS, by being centralized, allows us to connect across all of these different applications that exist across the internet. And so that no matter what tech stack you're using, we all are able to find each other and work together. And that's actually been very, very powerful. I think it's a big part of why those systems have worked. But we don't yet have these universal identifiers, right? We have all these very specific identifiers, right? How many people here have an ENS name, right? Wow, almost everyone. That was fantastic. So you all have a fantastic identifier on the Ethereum blockchains, right? Like ENS is Ethereum, but it's used for resolution on other blockchains sometimes. It's a little questionable there. But you probably don't have a Cosmos identifier. What is the identifier if someone on Solana wants to send an asset to you or interact with one of your contracts? Right? We don't have those sorts of things, and that's a critical piece of infrastructure that we need in order to solve this problem of thinking interchain. So one of these things that I talk about is the idea of a chain stack. So I define a chain stack as a set of technology that underpins a set of blockchains. So EVM I consider a chain stack that powers those 455 blockchains that I talk about. But there's also these chain stacks developing in other spaces. And so we have EVM to EVM. Okay? That's where a lot of developers are. But we need to start thinking about how do we include the rest of the world and the other chain stacks so that we have abstractions that are meaningful so that we can build better contracts. We also need to unite. We don't even use shared terminology. One of the things that I do is I try and go to a non-crypto conference every year. Just a conference with developers talking about building for web, building servers, all those sorts of things. And one of the things I did at the last conference is I set up a list of 10 questions around blockchain. And I just went to them and I said, hey, I'm going to ask 10 questions. And we barely got past question 2. Because most developers out there don't even know that you can build software on blockchain. They don't know that there's a virtual environment that you can build here. So there's a lack of awareness. But there's also a lack of trust. When Web 2 developers hear Web 3, they have very negative connotations. I hear words like scam. I hear words like evil. Because we create terms like Web 3 to divide ourselves, when maybe Web 3 could be more of an evolution. Maybe we could find a way to welcome Web 2 into what we're doing. Maybe we could find a way to welcome them into the ideas of privacy, transparency, immutability, decentralization. Right? How could we think about a future where we're able to actually give, instead of trying to get all those Web 2 developers to come over and solve our problems, our blockchain and ecosystem problems, how do we figure out how to take blockchain technology and use it to solve the problems that they have? I've been involved with a startup that built an app for language learning for a while, and I think about that team of 20 developers a lot. How can we bring blockchain to them and make it meaningful for them rather than trying to pull them over, give up all the skills and knowledge that they know about their industry, about their customers? How can we solve problems for them so that we can unite and actually take advantage of all that mental capital, all those ideas they have? And some of this is going to come from standards, but I've been in a bunch of calls around, for example, NFT standards. And NFT standards sound like a really good idea, right? We're going to come up with a standard, and now we're going to be able to move NFTs between chain stacks, between blockchains. But the first question that comes up in those meetings is, why? What do people actually want to do with this? Because without that actual use case, without the understanding of the actual experience that a user wants with an interchain or a cross-chain NFT, you're going to build the wrong standard. You're not going to have the right sorts of capabilities. And so as we unite, I really think that we need to go back to some of these first principles and focus on the user, focus on the problems that they're trying to solve, focus on the developer. What needs do they have, and how can we solve those for them? So I'm going to summarize briefly here. I think that the Interop Summit is such an important, magical moment. Look around you. You have some of the leaders of people that are thinking about this interoperable future, that are thinking about this interchain future. Make really strong connections here. And one of the things I'll say is sometimes in crypto we get into a little bit of a religion battle where it's like my chain versus your chain. But there's a concept that originally comes from improv, but it's becoming bigger and bigger in business as well, which is this concept of yes and. Which is instead of immediately rejecting an idea that someone gives you and saying, no, it's not going to work, that's not my blockchain, that's not my tech stack, I don't care. Accept what they're saying, say yes, and try and build on it. Try and take the things that you know and improve and help their ideas. Because when we're all working together, instead of all working against each other, we're going to succeed. Obviously, I think everyone here wants to think interchain now after hearing this. And so really, when you're thinking about scaling, when you're thinking about, hey, I need to turn this app into a production app, when I want to actually build a business, make sure that you're including this concept of interchain as a core fundamental part of that. Because if you just add it on later, you're going to be technologically worse than if you'd thought about it up front. And I really do believe that here, in this room, with the people watching the live stream and the other remote locations, because I know this room's packed, we're all going to build a future together. Thank you so much.